Hello and welcome to the Joe Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Ligato, and today we're going to be reviewing what does the United States mean when it says the rules-based international order. And we have a Twitter post here from Arnaud Bertrand talking about a book called Sub-Imperial Power by Clinton Fernandez, who is a former Australian intelligence officer and now professor of International and Political Studies at the University of New South Wales. Okay, so let's see. So the book makes one of the best descriptions of the rules-based international order that Arnaud has ever read, describing in detail how Australia isn't a vassal or client of the United States, like many believe, but rather a sub-imperial power. Okay, so I'm going to be interested to see how did they make this distinction between a vassal or client state versus a sub-imperial power. Okay, so what this means is that Australia, as well as other sub-imperial powers like Israel or the UK, are essentially the henchmen of the US's current imperial rule, tasked with preserving it in their respective regions. Okay, so let's see what we think about this so far. All right, so I would say that given Rothschild money owned the United Kingdom and really pushed the United Kingdom across the world whenever it was the sole superpower of the world. And given the fact that United States banking cartels, which are also Rothschild controlled, control the United States and their own foreign policy, and given the fact that the Rothschilds played a large role in the creation of Israel, I would say the relationship between these powers is actually that all of these other countries are sub-imperial powers of Israel controlled by the Zionist interests. So we have one disagreement already with this interpretation of events, but let's see what it means by sub-imperial power. So, which means that as henchmen, they aren't so much victims of a hegemonic U.S. rule, but instead feel that they derive such disproportionate benefits from it that they're willing to go to great lengths to help the U.S. preserve this role against the actual victims, those who disproportionately lose out from the order. Okay, so for the most part, I do agree with this. It does seem like these countries, or I should say, and they didn't make this clear here, I do think that a subset of people within these countries actually do benefit from what the United States calls the rules-based international order. And because of that, these co-opted elite elements within the society dictate the country, and they act as the overlords of the country in order to make sure that they stay aligned with the Zionist interest that controls various countries of the world, because they derive an excessive benefit from it. And you can see that within the United States Congress. You can see that from various leaders of the United Kingdom who were supposedly on Jeffrey Epstein's island, things like that. And so these various people are controlled, blackmailed, threatened, bribed by Israeli Zionist intelligence assets, and they derive a lot of benefits from that relationship, even if they are to a certain extent forced into that relationship, likely due to other means in a lot of cases. And so it is not the nations as a whole that benefit from this win-lose situation that the United States and the West puts the world in, but it is a subset of the population, a subset of the elites within the population that actually do benefit and do work to maintain this situation. Okay, so moving on. One of the most interesting aspects of this book is how it departs from the theories of realism championed by the likes of John Mearsheimer or Stephen Walt, who assert that all states, regardless of culture, religion, social hierarchy, or political system, will act in the same way because they all prioritize survival and security above all else. Okay, so we're going to have to think about do we agree with this or not? Will act in the same way because they all prioritize survival and security above all else. I would say that is the case given the circumstances. You change your strategy given the circumstances you find yourself in. So there might be certain strategies that work at one instance in time, but they don't work in another instance in time. Or they may work in one setting or context or with certain people, but they don't work in another setting or context with other people. And so you have to tailor your strategy given the hand that you're dealt. So I agree with this theory of realism to a certain extent. So this goes on to say, they assert that given that maximizing power is the best way to survive in the international system, if they had the opportunity, all states would seek to become hegemons like the US is today or Imperial Britain was yesterday. Okay, I do think that is the case, but the way that you get to the head of the system, the top of the hierarchy, might differ given the hand that you're dealt, is what I am trying to say here. However, it looks like Fernandez disagrees here. So it goes on to say Fernandez makes a very different case, which I actually think is a far better explanation of how the world actually works and of historical behavior of various states. His point is that there's something unique about US geopolitics and that of Western colonial states before it, in that they have these extremely aggressive characteristics, the impulse to subjugate and pillage others, that actually often harm their security rather than safeguard it. Okay, I don't think that's the case, because they're looking at it at the wrong level of analysis. They don't care if these Western countries are harmed or not. Their overall goal is to extract the most benefit from the situation, and then they can pick up and leave, because these Zionist elements have either been pushed out of a number of countries, hundreds of countries, or they've left willingly because they've already extracted and exploited all the resources they can. So for them, they don't really care about the security of the nation state itself. They care about their own benefit. And so their current actions make complete sense when you think about it, as they do not care about the United States. They don't care about the United Kingdom. They don't care about Australia. They don't care about Ireland. They don't care about any of these countries that are facing problems because of their policies, because these Zionists in charge and the people that they've co-opted will just flee the country after they've caused enough problems and the country either recognizes it or they realize they can't get any more benefit from being within that country. And so for them, they are what various other intellectuals in the past call rootless cosmopolitans, because they do not have any inherent loyalty to these countries. If they face enough threats abroad where they can't be safe anywhere, they will just flee to Israel. And so that's why Israel as a state needs to exist for these Zionist entities, because they commit so many crimes abroad that they do need a safe haven if no countries will take them at a certain point. And we've seen this in America, where various Zionists have been accused of sex crimes, and they've fled America and other Western countries because they don't want to face any consequences for their actions, and so they've fled to Israel. And so the only country that they actually care about and the only security that they actually care about is Israel's, because they are rootless cosmopolitans. Okay, so I think this person, Fernandez, if he understood this, would agree with my perspective, but it does not sound like he understands that the people in charge, they don't care about harming the security of the country. They only care about their own benefit because they are rootless cosmopolitans. So let's see what else he says in this paragraph. And he explains this with the undue power the moneyed class has over the state in those systems of government, which is hard to deny if one looks at things historically. For instance, it is the East India Company that initiated the colonization and pillage of India, not the British state that only came afterwards to essentially pacify growing rebellion in India so as to perpetuate the ongoing pillage. Okay, so what they're saying here is that moneyed interest, the Zionists who control the forces of capital, the merchant class within Western society, they are the ones that actually go out and cause problems across the world. They extract resources and exploit the populace of various countries of the world. And it historically was the United Kingdom that helped to fix the problems that they cause, or put out the fires that they cause, maybe a better way of putting it. And then that torch was passed to the United States to put out the fires that the Zionists cause, the rootless cosmopolitans, the banking cartels cause. And so this has occurred numerous times throughout history, that the same rootless cosmopolitans continuously do the exact same thing, and we seemingly never learn from history in this instance. Okay, so let's move on to say, or take a more recent example, the war in Iraq. It makes very little sense from an American security or survival perspective, but it makes eminently good sense from a U.S. oil company or economic hegemony perspective. And it makes a ton of sense if your end goal is not the security of America, but is actually the security of Israel, because you are a Zionist-occupied government. So it goes on to say, or again, the current conflict in Gaza, which is extremely negative for American security as it generates busloads of hatred throughout the Muslim world against America and diverts American attention from more consequential geopolitical challenges. But it makes sense if you look at it from the standpoint of perpetuating a hegemonic system. And again, who is at the head of that hegemonic system? It is the rootless cosmopolitans who are Zionist, who are the banking cartels, who get pushed out of a ton of countries, who do a ton of obscene things, and they just flee from any consequences over and over again. So Fernandez is just unfortunately not understanding this. So it goes on to say, in other words, Fernandez's point is that the key characteristics of the rules-based international order relates to the actual structure of the American or British, French, Australian, etc. social and economic system, which seeks to enforce an order where the whole world is open to the penetration and control of their respective national money classes, which is why the order is about hegemony and not about security, and why the former so often comes at the expense of the latter. Yeah, that's because of the fact that the people in charge, the people making the policies, don't care about your security. They don't care about the security of nations because they are rootless cosmopolitans. They've done this in the past whenever countries have tried to move away from the banking cartel's control. They've stopped that. They stopped that with Germany. They stopped that with Yugoslavia. They stopped that with Libya. They stopped that with Iraq. They stopped that with Saudi Arabia at one point, tried to do oil embargoes. They've assassinated leaders. So they do this over and over and over again. And with Russia and China now trying to decouple from the Western Zionist-controlled banking cartels, they are trying to do the exact same thing again. So yes, it does come at the cost of security. Their hegemonic interests come at the cost of security because they don't care about the people, they don't care about the countries, because they are rootless cosmopolitans. See, that's the wonderful thing is my perspective of the world makes complete sense. And if I put data into my perspective and it gives me an output, that output is nearly always correct because of the fact that I have the correct lens through which to interpret events of the world. Okay. Other people are very confused about why things are going on. Like Fernandez sounds very confused here. And it's because of the fact that they do not have the lens that I have, where I'm able to understand the rootless cosmopolitans do not care about the security of nations aside from Israel. So moving on, it's interestingly something that John Mearsheimer often laments about. If you listen to him, why would the U.S. act in such a foolish ways that go against what my realist theories recommend? Mearsheimer is not allowed to say the truth, which is that they are going against their own interests, their own security, because they are Zionist controlled. He was adamantly opposed to the war in Iraq, warned for many years about the risk of a clash with Russia and Ukraine if we expanded NATO, and keeps speaking out against the U.S. unequivocal support of Israel. Notice all of those things have one thing in common. It helps the rootless cosmopolitans, and none of them really increase the security of the United States, though they do, in some cases, increase the security of Israel. And by doing so, Mearsheimer actually admits that realism doesn't quite explain the behavior of states and that his theory are therefore not quite right. That's not what he's saying. Mearsheimer is not allowed to say the truth because he would be labeled an anti-Semite if he did say the truth here. Fernandez here offers an explanation that better predicts the actual behavior of the U.S. and its sub-imperial powers. You cannot understand the state's behavior if you limit yourself to a state-centric view. You also need to look at the unique characteristics of their political, social, and economic system. And then you also have to remember that the people in charge are rootless cosmopolitans that have no loyalty to the nation. Okay? Whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay. All right. So it goes on to say a last interesting point is that given the fact that he argues the state's political and economic systems play a key role in defining their geopolitics, Fernandez's book implies a prediction that as China's power rises, it will behave in vastly different ways than the U.S. and its imperial henchmen. Given the Chinese system, it will undoubtedly seek to maximize its power, but this time it will actually be for its own security and survival, not to serve the interests of its money class, and as such will behave in much less aggressive ways than the U.S. Okay, so they are not allowing Zionists to control their financial systems, their economic systems, and so they're going to behave differently. Yeah, that obviously makes sense because the Zionist interests that control the financial and economic systems of the West do not care about the security of the nation states. They are not members of the nation state. They are very hostile. They consider people of Western countries to be Amalek, Edomites, however you pronounce that. They consider them to be soulless golems. They consider them to be the Goyim. And so, yes, China is going to act very differently as long as they are not taken over by Zionist interests. There was some interest early on where the Zionists tried to take control of China and were not successful, luckily for the rest of the world. Okay, so let's see what else it says. Again, interestingly, Mearsheimer kind of admits this too, because he repeatedly says, when I'm in China, I'm amongst my people, as in they follow his realist theories much more faithfully than the US. Okay, so again, this is because of the fact that the Zionist interests are actually realists as well. They just don't have any interest in the security of Western nations. Okay, so Mearsheimer is saying when he's talking to the Zionists, he understands they're not realists in the sense that they are for the security of nations like America or like United Kingdom or like Australia, but they are realists in the sense that they are completely pro-Israel and pro themselves, really. Okay, so he goes on to say, we can already see the contours of this. It's absolutely obvious that the Chinese state isn't exactly at the mercy of its money class. Quite the contrary. China is not exactly a country where billionaires have an easy life. And this is something that historically has made a ton of sense. Throughout nearly every country, throughout nearly every nation state, every civilization, the political class and the merchant class have been kept separate. It was a few hundred years ago that the merchant class ended up toppling the ruler political classes within Western society, and they were hostile towards the people of those nations. And so they do not care about the security of those nations because the merchant class is a separate, distinct entity in Western nations. They are Zionist. And you're not allowed to actually say that because it's anti-Semitic. But that is the case. If you look up the oligarchs that took over after the collapse of the Soviet Union in Eastern Europe, they are nearly all directly Zionist or co-opted by Zionists. If you look at people in the West who silence dissent, who control various social media outlets, who are major political donors, they are nearly always Zionist. People who are bribing, blackmailing Western politicians, such as Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, they are Zionists. No matter who you look at, they are nearly always Zionists. So, pattern recognition is anti-Zionist, is what I would say there. Okay, so this goes on to say same thing with respect to hegemony. China just doesn't do military alliances. It doesn't have any foreign interference or coup d'etats. In fact, they haven't as much as fired a single bullet abroad in over 4 decades. On the contrary, it seeks to create an order with indivisible security and mutual respect embedded in the system, where it'd ideally be the most powerful state, sure, but not for the purpose of pillaging or subjugating others, but because this guarantees its security and stability. Okay, so the reason the West is like the way it is, pillaging and subjugating other peoples, is because the Zionists who control the West consider non-Zionist to be golems that do not have a soul and to be essentially cattle for them to control. And so, yeah, China's going to have a different tactic because their religion does not tell them that other human beings are cattle. Okay, so this goes on to say, which is exactly how China behaved for 1,800 years when it was the most powerful state on the planet before the Industrial Revolution. It never went around trying to colonize and pillage the world, as it believed this would eventually come at the expense of its own security, much like it comes at the expense of American security interests today. Instead, it sought relationships of trade and mutual respect that maximize security and stability over long term. Anyhow, you should really read the book. Okay, so here's the book, Sub-Imperial Power, Australia in the International Arena by Clinton Fernandez. So, again, I think Mearsheimer might understand what's going on. He's just not allowed to say it because he would be branded anti-Semitic. Arnaud Bertrand, though, and Fernandez here do not seem to understand the key aspect, which is that the moneyed class, the merchant class of the West, is actively hostile towards the other classes of Western civilization. And so for them, they don't care about the security of the rest of the classes of the nation states because their interest is Zionist interest. And so we're seeing that given the current conflicts between the Zionists and anti-Zionists all throughout the world right now. So anyways, that's what I'll leave you with. Hopefully this has been enlightening for people because I don't think everyone really understands. I think a few people understand that the West is Zionist controlled. This is a merchant class that is distinct from the other classes of Western society, and they are actively hostile towards the other classes of Western society. So if you found this video to be helpful, informative, please give us a thumbs up. It does help us in the algorithm. Please subscribe to our channel on YouTube and Rumble for more content, and promote our channel as much as possible if you can, because we're going to start looking at actively growing in the next coming months. I'm going to look into monetization. I'm going to look into doing some interviews, things like that. Pretty busy right now with a number of different things, but yeah, that is in the upcoming future. And so please promote our channel as much as possible. If you find this to be interesting and you want other people to hear about it, please leave us a comment in the comment box below. Questions, concerns, critiques. We love hearing from you, and I will respond whenever necessary. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.